Hey there, y'all. Welcome to Wednesday, True Crime Wednesday. Welcome to an hour of chatting about everything that's in the news. I'm Lori Hellish, your host for True Crime Wednesday at Children of Darkness and Light. On Fridays, we usually talk about all things Vallow, Vallow Daybell. And on Wednesdays, we talk about all the other cases that are in the news. And of course, everybody wants to talk about Murdaugh. So we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about the Murdaugh case. I'm going to just let folks catch up a little bit and we'll move ahead. In the meantime, if you haven't subscribed, please do. Please hit the like button and give us a thumbs up because it certainly helps with the YouTube algorithm. And please hit the notification bell because, as you all know, the Vallow trial is coming up in April. We have no indication at this point that the judge is going to change his mind about cameras in the courtroom, but I will be there live and in person, and I will be giving you regular updates from the courthouse. So if you want those notifications of when we go live, be sure and hit that little bell. So let's talk. Let's start out by talking about Vallow Daybell because there's a hearing tomorrow. And we don't know how much of that hearing is actually going to be public and how much of it will be behind closed doors. There have been a couple of motions to seal. There have also been some other hearings that have kind of come up quickly. And I actually got a Vine notification earlier today that she has a hearing on Friday as well. I don't know how accurate that is. Vine sometimes can be a little odd. That is the Victim Notification Network. And a lot of people subscribe to it because it gives them notice of when a defendant is going to be transported or if there's an event happening with a person who's in jail. So I didn't get the opportunity because I was deep into Murdaugh to check this afternoon before I came on the air to see if there were any new hearings on the books. I'm just looking at the fact that my microphone doesn't look like it's on. So you might hear in the background, I have a dog barking outside as usual. So just want to make sure everybody can hear me since my microphone seems like it's not working. So I must be running on my internal microphone. Let me just double check here and make sure I'm running on my internal microphone because my mic isn't on and I can't wrestle around behind the computer to find out why, but I will. In the meantime, good. Okay. Everybody says they can hear well, so I'm not going to worry about the microphone and wrestle around behind the computer with the connectors. So let's talk about Vallow because there's a lot coming up this week. There are a number of motions, and for anybody that gets my newsletter, this is a good reason to get the newsletter. I did a fairly comprehensive look at the motions that are coming up this week. Most of the motions are pretty procedural. The motions to seal had to do with the motion for an introduction of evidence, an objection to 404B, which, if everybody's been watching the Murdaugh case, is character or it's evidence of past bad deeds, which I'm assuming will have something to do with what happened in Arizona with Charles. the state did stipulate to extend the discovery deadline. And I think that had to do with the fact that it took so long to get the DNA evidence. So they're extending the discovery deadline for the defense. What that means is that they have some extra time before they have to identify their expert witnesses and provide their discovery back to the state. So there are a number of probably the most significant of those motions is the motion to dismiss for lack of speedy trial. I don't think that goes anywhere because I think the judge is going to say there was good cause. The good cause was based on Lori being incompetent this fall when her attorneys were asking for her to be reevaluated. And that caused them to have to vacate the January trial date. And then they had to work with Ada County in order to reset the date. So I think the judge is going to find there's good cause to have gone beyond Lori's. Sorry, I was just trying to look at something on the other screen. I think the judge is going to find there's good cause to go beyond Lori's speedy trial deadline, and I think from there the defense can take it up with the appeals court. That's typically how these kind of things go. It's rare for a judge to dismiss a case out of hand because of lack of speedy trial at the trial court level. Usually it goes to the appellate courts whose job it is to figure those things out. So we'll see, but I wouldn't expect that the case is going to be dismissed for lack of speedy trial. And I don't expect that any of the motions that have been filed are particularly going to impact the trial date. So we will see what happens tomorrow and on Friday. I don't know if there's going to be a TGIF yet. I'm traveling tomorrow to go down and visit with my daughter and help with some wedding planning. So I suspect that I won't have the opportunity to do a Friday night. But if there are important developments that come out of tomorrow's hearing, I certainly will try at least get a brief update to you. So if there's not a lot that comes out of tomorrow's hearing, then we probably won't have TGIF. But if there are big developments, I'll make sure that we get on at least for a short update. So let's talk about Bryan Kohberger. Not a lot going on in that case, but there is sort of a couple of interesting tidbits. We understand that just before the murders happened, he was fired from his teaching assistant job. And one of the reasons was because of his improper and inappropriate treatment of female students, that he treated them, he graded them more difficult, he treated them poorly, and he was counseled repeatedly, and it was still going on, and so he was fired from his teaching assistant job. So you have to wonder if that could have been part of the accumulation of his of the pressure cooker, right? You have to wonder whether or not that contributed to this pressure cooker that was going on. Interesting to think about. So the other thing that I find really interesting is that the judge in this case issued a gag order. Now, typically, a gag order controls all of the people who are parties to the case. And that gag order is there to say that you can't talk about what you know about the case to the media while the case is going on. So typically, the gag order impacts all the people who are directly involved and are parties to the trial. That means the prosecution, the defense, and all the people who work for either one of those. This judge issued a gag order that covers the families of the victims. And I think that this judge has overstepped what his power is and his authority is, because I don't think the judge has the authority to order a public citizen to gag a private citizen. I just don't think that the authority of the judge goes that far. So that's interesting, yeah. I the attorney for uh, the Gonsalves family has already contested the court's order, and so we'll see what happens. But I think it's really an very interesting idea, whether or not the court has the authority to do that. Um, So that's the couple developments that are going on in the Kohberger case. I checked into the Michael Vaughn case, which is the other case in Idaho, the little boy who disappeared over a year ago, and now the neighbors have been arrested, and law enforcement dug up the neighbor's yard looking for his body. His body was not found. They believe the cadaver dogs definitely alerted on an area, and they believe that perhaps he was buried and then his body was exhumed and moved. So the people who live there are Sarah and Stacy Wondra. Stacy Wondra, the husband, was arrested on an unrelated felon in possession of a weapon charge and is in jail on that charge. Sarah Wondra was originally arrested on a charge of failing to report a death. Very quickly, her lawyers expressed deep concern about her competency, and she was promptly shipped off to the state hospital for restoration services. And that's where she's been basically since she was arrested. So we don't really know, just like the Vallow case, we don't know how long it will take and if she will be restored. Um, I think in this case, there are some reasonable questions about her long-term competency, because competency is not only is a person sane enough to understand what's going on in court, but it's also, does the person have the intellectual capacity? And I wonder whether or not she has some disabilities and maybe she's of diminished intellectual capacity. It's a little hard to sort out with what little we've seen of her, but it does make you wonder. So there are two other suspects that were living with them at their house. One's name is Adrien Lucien. It was from Toledo, Ohio, and is suspected that he is back in Ohio somewhere. He has a long history of meth arrests and drug arrests. So we'll see if he turns up on law enforcement's radar eventually back there. The other one, Brandon Shirtliff, is from Kuna, Idaho, which is a community near Boise. And he is suspected to be in North Dakota. So I'm sure that law enforcement are still on the lookout for them. But at this point, everything's kind of on hold, waiting for Sarah Wondra's competency. And I think hoping that at some point, one of the four of them will turn on the others and actually tell law enforcement what happened. And then there's the Walsh case. Brian Walsh was arrested because his wife Anna was disappeared on New Year's Day, and they were living in Florida. She was a commercial real estate agent in Washington, D.C., and she was supposed to leave to go to D.C. for work, and she never showed up, and nobody knows where she is. And then he's the one who did all the Google searches for how to dismember a body and how to get rid of a body and a whole lot of other really unpleasant things. There was evidence in the basement in the house and also in material that was found in landfill that suggested that she had her blood on it, hacksaws, a rug, a lot of things that suggested that her body had been dismembered. He was seen on cameras discarding things in dumpsters around his mother's apartment, which was some ways away. And unfortunately, those dumpsters were collected and went to the incineration plant before they could be searched. So her body may never be found. And as we've talked about before, no body cases are difficult sometimes. I think there's a tremendous amount of information that indicates that she's no longer alive, and I think that may make it a little bit easier for them to try a no body case. But no body cases are sometimes much more difficult to prove. In the Delphi case, there's a March trial date, but people are already expressing doubt that the case can actually go forward in March. If it did, it would be a very fast trial. And speaking of fast trials, how about Murdaugh? Holy cow. You know, in the grand scheme of things, this case got to trial very quickly. His attorneys definitely exercised his right to a speedy trial, demanded from the beginning that the case go forward. That's certainly a tactic we've talked about before. Sometimes it's because they feel like the prosecution's not ready, and the quicker they can get the prosecution to trial, the better. But this has been really interesting. The trial's been going on for 2 weeks now. Now we're into week 3, so we're halfway through week 3. They originally said they thought that the case was going to go 3 weeks, and we spent 2 days just taking testimony that the jury hasn't heard yet. So what happened was the defense raised an objection to any information coming in about Alec Murdaugh's financial misdeeds, and saying that it was character evidence, that it was evidence of prior bad acts that were brought in to prove that he's a bad guy. And so the state wanted an offer of proof. What that meant was that the judge took testimony from all of those witnesses, what they call in camera. In camera can mean several things. It often means in chambers. In this aspect, it meant not in front of the jury. So not in front of the jury. So what happened was the um, interesting. I have to comment on this. I just saw a comment fly by, and the person was talking about that they were in a different chat room, and it was so rude, and it was so refreshing and great to be here where everyone is so polite. Thank you for that. I think we're all friends, and I think that we can all politely and reasonably disagree on things and yet not be disagreeable. So I'm super appreciative that everybody else sees that too. Now, to get back to Murdaugh. So the judge allowed Murdaugh's, the judge allowed the state to put on all this financial evidence so that the judge could make a determination about what was going to happen, whether that testimony was admissible. So the judge heard lots of testimony, and it was juicy. So we had the comptroller from the chief financial officer from Alec Murdaugh's law firm, sort of setting the stage for how they discovered what was going on in his firm. Then we had the fellow who he was trying a case with was a lawyer who was not in his firm, another law firm in town, come in and talk about how how he dispersed some funds and what Alec told him about how to disperse the funds, which was super interesting. And then we had his assistant who came in today and talked about how cagey he was suddenly about how the form that the checks were written in, and how oftentimes he would wait until she was gone and get somebody else to do the disbursement sheets and the orders for checks, because they wouldn't be as familiar and wouldn't cop to what he was doing. So it's super fascinating. It's interesting from so many standpoints. One of the things that I think is very interesting is that the state's theory, which I have to say I buy, the state's theory is that the walls were closing in on him, and he believed that the only way to get out of this was to murder his wife and son. And there were a variety of reasons that went into this. He had transferred both of the major pieces of property, Moselle, which was their hunting lodge, and the Edisto Beach house, which was Maggie's favorite place, into Maggie's name because of the boat crash. He had also, so he didn't have any control over those things anymore. He was trying desperately to get Palmetto State Bank, Russell Lafitte, and his friend at Palmetto State Bank, to give him a loan against that property, even though the property was already securing loans with Palmetto State Bank. But I think Alec felt he could talk Russell Lafitte into giving him these loans, but he couldn't get Maggie to keep an appointment with the appraiser to come out and appraise the property. So that was a big problem. Maggie's estate was worth about $5 million, and $5 million would have gone a ways to bail Alec out. I still think that morning when when the CFO confronted Alec about the $792,000 that was missing, and that meeting was interrupted by a phone call from a family member telling Alec that his father had gone back in the hospital and that the doctors were saying there wasn't much more they could do for him and he was likely going to pass soon. And I think that was the point when she then immediately backed off and became very conciliatory and very wanting to know if he was okay, if the family was okay. Definitely sort of shifted gears and became much more of a friend than the CFO. And I think that was the point that the light bulb turned on for him. He couldn't predict how soon his father Randolph would die, and that wasn't particularly going to buy him the kind of time he needed to move things around and cover everything, so that because he'd been playing this shell game, it wasn't going to give him the opportunity that he needed to move things around and cover everything before it was uncovered. So and it was becoming more likely that it was going to get uncovered because of the boat crash. And frankly, Paul was a liability. And I think that I know that there are some people who feel that Paul was just happened to be there and was collateral damage. I don't believe that. I think that Alec really felt that the only way out of this was if Paul was dead, then the boat crash case would go away. I think he really believed that. So I will say that when we have seen emotional reactions for him, it has typically been in conversations about Paul and Paul's death, not so much about Maggie. So I'm certain that once he had done this horrible thing, I'm certain that he was distraught over it. I mean, I have no doubt that when he realized what he had done, he was distraught over killing Paul. The witnesses we've heard so far have said they believe Paul was shot first and then Maggie. And who knows what goes through someone's mind in that particular circumstance. But I think that he was a little bit frenzied. I do think that we can see from the evidence that it's very clear that he was wearing different clothes. And I do think that he went back to his house and changed his clothes afterwards. So really interesting stuff that we're hearing. Judge Newman did allow all of that financial testimony to come in. So we're hearing it again now, and we'll keep hearing it for a while. Today they had a bomb threat, which was sort of interesting. Late in the day, they cleared the courtroom and swept the courthouse for devices. It wasn't anything. It didn't turn out to be anything. The jury came back. They heard a couple of additional witnesses before the end of the day. But it was. It's been a really interesting trial. It's been an interesting trial from a trial strategy standpoint. From anybody that wants an education on how to try a good case, I think both sides are doing really well. I'm very impressed with the prosecution and how on top of their case they are in terms of the technology, the exhibits. They're right on it. And Dick and Jim, the defense attorneys, are having to catch up a little bit, but I think they're doing better as time goes along with that kind of stuff. Jim Harpootlian seems a little bit befuddled when it comes to the technology and spends a lot of time shuffling through papers and looking a little confused. Eric Bland, who is the attorney representing he is the attorney representing the Satterfield sons, has been in the courtroom and has commented that he thinks that Harpootlian looks pretty tired right now. This is a long trial. Most attorneys are not accustomed to trying cases that go on for 2 and 3 weeks. Most attorneys are not accustomed to doing this every day, day after day. Trial is very demanding. It is very intellectually and emotionally demanding. You can't, you cannot let your mind wander. You can't let your you can't be wool gathering. You've got to be listening all the time. And it really is, if you are sitting there with a client, then you are multitasking all the time because you're tending to your client. You're trying to listen to the evidence that's coming in. You're making objections. I mean, you are on all the time. You cannot afford a moment of not paying attention. And that's exhausting. So we know that a week or two of trial, people are worn out. Lawyers are worn out, and this case is going to go on for a long time. I expect in the Vallow Daybell case, they're talking about up to 10 weeks. The fatigue is going to set in quickly. Jurors get fatigued as well, and I think people were commenting on the fact that it appears that the jurors in the Murdaugh case are already feeling a bit fatigued. So I did have one little interesting sort of moment in the Murdaugh case that I thought was really interesting. Creighton Waters, who is the lead counsel for the prosecution, was talking to Alec Murdaugh's previous legal assistant, and she was talking about the fact that, you know, if you needed anything, you went to Alec, and if you had a problem, you went to Alec, and people were always coming to him. People trusted him to fix their stuff. People trusted him, and it was so interesting because he walked over and he picked up this file with all of the stuff from all of the people who he had swindled. Picked up this big file and he waved it at her and he said, like, these people trusted him, and she said yes, and he said, these people, and he slammed the file down on the table. Very theatrical, very effective, I thought. But what I thought was really interesting was it elicited from Alec this kind of smirky, almost eye roll. And I completely understand why Alec would think that those theatrics were so inappropriate and roll his eyes. But I think what came across was here is Creighton Waters holding up this whole file of all of these people that Alec has wronged. And I think it could have been perceived as a smirk, like, yeah, so what? So I thought that was interesting, was just a little interesting byplay. It certainly was a little over the top theatrics, probably got the attention of the jurors who might have been getting a little sleepy by that point. So that's what we're up to today. There's a lot going on, and I would love to take your questions, and we'll talk, I'm sure, at length. While our moderators are working on questions, I want to remind everybody, here's our quilt squares back here on the wall. I'm a little tardy in getting the next video out, but I promise it will be out by late next week. And that one is going to cover some new techniques that we're doing. And we're going to get started on that right away. If you have not gotten your pattern yet, there really is no group to join. I am going to invite folks to post on Facebook, on our Children of Darkness and Light Facebook group, to post their finished squares, because we really want to share those and be able to do a little show and tell. If you haven't joined yet, the pattern is available on Etsy. The information is in the show notes to this video. and go ahead and download the pattern. There are 3 videos that are in our video library now that are how-to videos. This is a perfect pattern for beginners. So join us. It's not too late to get started, and the information is on the screen. It's also in our show notes, and you can join us. It's a great quilt for using up scraps. It's also a great quilt if you have somebody special in mind that you'd like to make it for. So I missed a question having to do with Paul being a minor. So if my mods wanna grab that question, I don't want to miss it because you put it up and I was still blah blah blahing. But I'm going to answer Bo Peeps right now. I still wonder if there was a ring cam at Alex's mom's house. If so, I wonder if that's why he knocked on the door for the caregiver to let him in. Do ring cams still record? They do. They record anytime they're motion sensitive. So even if you don't ring the doorbell, they still record. So if there were a ring cam, it would have recorded him coming in. I think it's interesting. They were asked whether or not there were cameras at Moselle. There were surveillance cameras or security cameras there, and they weren't. There were no security cameras in Moselle, and he said only game cameras to keep track of where the deer and the wild hogs are. So I wouldn't surprise me if there were not surveillance cameras and a ring camera in the on his parents' house. Hi, Janet. Question on Murdaugh. I can't imagine how the jurors are keeping all these data points in any semblance of order without notebooks or visuals. Shouldn't the prosecution be providing charts and timelines? That's a good point, and I think that will come in closing, as they are making sure that they're hitting all the fact points. I think that will come in closing. I'm surprised the jurors aren't taking notes. Different judges have different feelings about jurors taking notes. And it can be kind of a double-edged sword. If someone is so focused on taking notes, maybe they miss things in court. I don't know. But this case turns on so many little small data points that it would seem like note taking would be helpful. I expect that you'll see those kinds of summing up abstracts of the evidence coming out closer to closing. Michelle Meadow. Meadow Crone. Underage Paul using Buster's extra ID is so off for me. The one point they keep making is that everyone knew each other. Surely everyone knew Paul was faking his age. Probably they did, but they also have that deniability of saying this kid came in, he had a valid ID and looked like him. I think that even for those who knew that he was underage, it was a wink, wink, nod, nod. And it's hard sometimes if you live in an area where alcohol enforcement is done more aggressively. I suspect that there are an awful lot of places that don't enforce alcohol laws as aggressively, and this may be one of those areas. So Yeah, even if they knew for sure that this was Paul Murdaugh and he was not 21, he flashed him an ID that said he was 21. So, um, I don't know that that gets them out of any liability coming up in the future. I think that that legal liability, I think they're stuck with. But from a criminal standpoint, I don't know. There's that question. Hi, Claire. Was Paul a minor? And is that why the parents are responsible for lawsuits payments? He was not a minor. He was 19, so he was over the age of 18. He was an adult. But the reason why the parents were sued, the reason why Alec was sued, is it was his boat. Um, he knew that there was going to be alcohol consumed on the boat, and he was the one who um, facilitated by allowing him to take the boat. I think that there was a there was a lot of information provided. I've seen it on social media, but it hasn't been offered here in trial to show that this was a family that easily condoned the boys consuming alcohol. They all drank together. They they provided alcohol for the kids. Kids knew that they could drink if they were at the Murdaughs. I mean, it was, yeah. I I think that that was the reason why they felt that um, there are that it was reasonable to hold him accountable. I'm from the area of the Murdaugh case. There are so many of those Parker's convenience stores around. I know Greg Parker, the owner, very well. I don't know that every Parker's employee knew Paul. Good point. So it's always great to talk to people who live in the area or who have some on the ground knowledge about what has happened. Um, I, it's I understand, and I'm a northerner. I understand that it is a very different social environment. I understand that the Murdaughs have um, been socially prominent for many generations, and that there was a sense that Paul was a little untouchable. So I think that's part of it. But I agree that there are many convenience stores. And the other part is Paul ran in different social circles from maybe people who were working at the convenience store. So although a lot of people in town knew Paul, not everybody knew him in the same social milieu, if that makes sense. So, not to put me on the spot, but is it possible that Buster was involved? Everything that I've heard so far is that Buster has an ironclad alibi. He was in Charleston, I believe, at the time the murders happened, that he could show exactly where he was. I mean, my understanding is there's no question that Buster was involved. And I doubt that. Um I think he and Paul were very close. I think they had their differences. They were very different personalities. I think Buster is a little more serious than Paul was, and Paul was very um, uh, Paul was one of those kids that really doesn't think about the consequences. So, but I think they were close. Danielle, oops, question. I noticed on Monday as they were looking at some of the evidence, the lady had gloves on, but the guy asking about the items touched them without. Is that normal? It's not. Typically, what happens is everybody who's touching evidence has gloves on. But I've noticed that these folks are play a little fast and loose with the gloves. I know at one point, one of the prosecution attorneys went to take something out of a bag, and the woman said, "I need to put gloves on." I think they can't really tell the lawyers, "You need to put gloves on," but I think the lawyers have been less careful about it. I think that the law enforcement folks who are on the stand have been pretty cautious about it. And typically, what happens is to preserve the chain of custody, to preserve the appearance that the evidence is not being mishandled. Typically, what happens is there are scissors and tape and all sorts of things at the witness stand, and as the trial goes on, the attorney asks the law enforcement person or the laboratory person to actually take things out, hold them up, talk about them, and usually the lawyers don't handle that stuff. They were handling the raincoat, which I thought, you know, the raincoat is so interesting because it's enormous. It's like one of those stadium coats that you would wear to a football game. It's a hood, and then it goes all the way to the floor. It and I could certainly see how somebody could mistake that for a blue tarp because it's that same kind of vinyl material. So, good question though. Do you think the prosecution has proven their case at this time if they rested now? Not sure. In a circumstantial case, if I had to say right now, I don't think so. I think they have more dots to connect. In a circumstantial case, you really have to create a chain of events that, once taken all together, make the picture. It's kind of like the pointillists from abstract artists, where they're doing these little bitty dots of paint, and close up they make no sense. But if you stand back 10 feet, oh, it's a scene of a picnic in a park. So I think that they're not there yet. I think they have many more little dots of paint to put up. Because I think what they need to do at this point is they need to start with that connective tissue. They need to start making the connections. Well, okay, why was this the motive? Why did Alec think there was nothing else he could do? I don't think they're there yet. I think they have that information, and I think they intend to present it. I think they're prepared to present that information. I just don't think they're there yet. I think we've got at least another few days of the prosecution's case, particularly since they had to repeat a lot of the um, financial information that was presented in camera then had to be repeated for the jury. So there's a lot of repetition going on. Maybe I missed this, but Lori, do you think that today's bomb threat could have been a tactic to intimidate Cousin Eddie's upcoming testimony? Would love to hear your thoughts. You know, I don't know. I mean, I know that we are going to hear from Cousin Eddie and that he is going to be a pivotal witness. And I think that he's going to say much more than anybody realizes. I think he knew more than most people realize. I think his testimony is going to be pretty explosive. I could be wrong. He could get on there and say, "Yep, I don't know anything," and be done. But I kind of doubt it. And I think his testimony is going to be important and explosive. As far as the bomb threat goes, I don't know. I'm more inclined to think that this is a high visibility case. It has gotten attention all over the world, like Vallow Daybell. There are a lot of people interested in it. And I have to think that there's a lot of crackpots out there, and that this could just as easily be absolutely unrelated and be some crazy guy who's living in his grandma's basement and is on his computer in his underwear. I mean, there are as many options for this bomb threat as there are people out there, I think. I don't know. I am not sure that I would attribute it to that. I think that the Murdochs' um, method of manipulation is much more subtle and much more nuanced. I think their method of manipulation is much more along the lines of talking to Miss Shelley, who was Alec's mother's caregiver, and saying, I was here for 30 or 40 minutes, right? I was here. And oh, by the way, I heard you're getting married and weddings are expensive, and maybe I could help you out with that, honey. That's much more of what you're going to see with the Murdochs, is that manipulation. I mean, I heard early on, you never want to owe Alec Murdaugh anything, because if you owe him, he owns you, and he will go out of his way to help you out so that you owe him, and then he owns you. Much different than threats of violence. I think it's a more subtle, more nuanced kind of threats. So it will be, I'm certain that they're investigating where the bomb threat came from, depending on what kind of technology there is that was available on the incoming end. They may very well be able to identify who was responsible for it. Question. I think what you're asking is whether Alec Murdaugh ever tried a criminal case in court. He has. He was an volunteer assistant solicitor, which was why there was so much troubling about the solicitor's office being on the scene the night of the murders, because he was a member of their office. He was a volunteer, but still, um, a lot of in a lot of communities, especially lawyers in larger firms, these personal injury firms that are fairly lucrative, lawyers are expected to do a certain amount of volunteer or pro bono kind of work, for the community. And so I don't know if that was part of the, I don't know, the motivation behind Alec becoming involved with the solicitor's office. But his grandfather was the solicitor at one point, which is the district attorney in that area. So the family had a history of being criminal lawyers, and he tried he tried at least one case with his father as the lead counsel, and then he did try a criminal case. Can't think of the name of the case, as a solicitor. And there was always some discussion about whether or not that in that particular case, he tried it because he had an interest in the drug activities that were going on, the drug activities of the defendant. So, because the defendant got kind of a sweet deal. These are a lot of tremendous details that Mandy Matney and Liz Farrell go into in depth in her podcast called The Murdaugh Murders. And if you want to go back and listen to some of the stuff that she talks about in terms of the Murdaughs' reach in the community, I think it's really fascinating. Mia Brooks. When they did the in-camera testimony, it was recorded. Does that mean they just play the recording to the jurors, or do they do it live for them? If done live, how do they ensure the exact same testimony? Well, I don't think you ever get the exact same testimony twice. No, they won't be playing it, the recording. They will be taking the testimony live, as you see, because they've already taken um, Jeannie Seconder, I think is her name. She's the CFO. They've already taken her testimony. Um, I think that they have gone through this testimony enough, and they realize that they likely would have to put it on in camera. That I think that they were pretty confident that they could get similar answers, and in sometimes the same answers, in a second go round. The other thing is, I think by the second time the witness feels a little more at ease, and the state is really going to go deeper in depth than they would have in the in-camera testimony. Because in the in-camera testimony, they were just convincing the judge that this was information that was relevant to the case and not more prejudicial than probative. In the in the case to the jury, they're really laying out the substantive facts of the case and uh, why it became motive for the murders. So, um, can the people Alex stole from their case payments sue the law firm for extra payments? Interesting question. My understanding is that the Satterfield boys that Eric Bland represents were entitled to about $4 million. And at this point, they have recovered about $7 million amongst all of the bad actors. But as a rule, what is my understanding so far of what has happened is that the firm has bent over backward to make all of these folks whole. One of the, I think it was the CFO again, testified that in one case, in the cases having to do with Palmetto State Bank, who were misappropriating monies that they were supposed to be the fiduciary for. That's money that Alec parked in Palmetto State Bank and made Russell Lafitte the trustee over for clients. So it was client money. And then Russell would let Alec borrow money out of his clients' accounts. As far as we know, that money, for the most part, got paid back, but the bank has been on the hook for some of the fines and fees and more punitive kinds of consequences for not overseeing that and allowing Alec to just take loans out of his clients' money. So I think at this point, the law firm is continuing to make sure that all of their clients have been made whole, but it could be. I mean, I think it's a little harder to prove that the law firm was negligent in not spotting what Alec was doing. So we'll see. Rabbit holes. Thank you for your donation. And that reminds me to say that all of the super chats that come in go directly to our moderators. And it really does make a difference for them. So thanks so much. And if you can give a little, please do, because they certainly deserve it. They're faithful, faithful moderators. Oh, I didn't get Rabbit's question, so let me just go back to it because I was thanking her for her donation and I didn't get her question. Oh, thanks for helping understand the reasons why and how things happen in trial. You're so welcome. I thought there was a question, but thank you for following us along, and I'm happy to be able to fill in the blanks for folks. It's nice that all that law school thing and all that legal experience comes in handy every once in a while. Janet, question. SLED reopened Stephen Smith's case after Paul and Maggie's murders. They found some sort of evidence, possibly on Paul's phone. My thought, possible DNA linking to Buster. I don't have any more information. It is my understanding that after the murders, they reopened the Stephen Smith case. I know that it is a case that a lot of folks down there are very passionate about, rightfully so. Stephen Smith really deserves justice. He was treated. He was done wrong. I mean, the system really failed him. For those of you who may not know, Stephen Smith was a young man. He was a young gay man in the community. He was a contemporary of Buster's, and he was killed. Initially, law enforcement said they thought that it was some sort of a pedestrian versus car hit and run. There's absolutely no evidence to show that it was, in fact, he was in fact hit by a car, but his body was found in the middle of the road, and people came to that conclusion, jumped to that conclusion quickly. His murder's never been solved, but there have been rumors that have swirled around the community that the Murdaugh boys were involved, that specifically Buster was involved, and that he may have had a personal relationship with Stephen Smith. Don't know. I know that there are folks down there, Mandy Matney included, who have said we will not rest until we resolve Stephen's case. So, and I hope that's the case soon. I hope justice comes for Stephen soon. But no one has ever released any further information about what it was that made them reopen the case. For those of you who might be interested, Kay and Larry Woodcock have been encouraging folks who are interested in the Vallow Daybell case to reach out to Judge Stephen Boyce and let him know your feelings about the decision to close the case and not to live stream it, to close the case to cameras. I don't know whether this will do any good or not. I have been hopeful all along that Judge Boyce would change his mind and would actually change his mind for trial. I don't know whether this helps or hurts, honestly. I don't know. I don't know what Judge Boyce is going to do when he receives all these letters and the petition and all those things. I don't know if that's going to sway him or whether he's going to dig his heels in and say, I said and I meant. I don't know. I will be there and be your ears and eyes regardless. But I don't know. I think I was a little hopeful that he would change his mind for trial. I don't know now. As we said before, we talk all things Vallow Daybell on Fridays, and I am hoping that we are going to have some big things to talk about because there's a hearing coming up tomorrow and possibly another one on Friday. I suspect the one on Friday is going to be closed, but at least if there's important stuff to bring you, I will bring it to you. If it looks like it was all kind of routine, I might not, because I'm going to be visiting with my daughter doing wedding planning. So, question, can they close the court to the public completely? Absolutely not. There are very limited instances where the court can close the courtroom. One can be if there is a minor testifying. The other is if there is a juvenile matter being heard. because juvenile matters and matters involving minors can be closed, but they cannot close the trial. It's absolutely unconstitutional, and it's simply not permitted. So I it will be interesting to see what Judge Boyce does with this information. But well, we're coming up on the 1 hour mark. I think I'll probably take one more question if there's one more out there, and then we'll say goodnight. I just want to thank everybody for joining us. I know that there are many other things you could be doing with your time than sitting with us. So I thank you so much for that. I appreciate that very much. And I also want to thank you on behalf of our moderators because they're great people and I appreciate them no end. And I appreciate how polite and how straightforward and on the up and up you all are in chat. I appreciate it immensely because my moderators deserve it. Brendan Tube, you think the caretaker of the mother mistook the raincoat for a tarp? I think she did. It doesn't take a lot to look at, and I thought it was interesting that the defense brought out the blue tarp. I thought that was a little bit of a tactical error because it really went to show how much like a blue tarp that raincoat looked. I think I would not have gone down that road had I would have stuck with the pictures. But they brought out the blue tarp, wadded it all up, and then that gave the prosecution the opening to then bring out the blue coat and wad it all up and talk about how they could look alike. So yeah, I think she did mistake the raincoat for a tarp. I mean, it may just be we all have our own like intellectual like brain bias, and so it may just be that in her mind, if it was blue and vinyl, it was a tarp. It may not. She may not have looked at it and thought, "I wonder what that is," because maybe she'd never seen a raincoat like that before. I mean, it doesn't have anything to do with her in particular, but we all have our own like mental maps, and um, we all process what's coming into us by what's already inside. So we're looking for hooks to hang things on, and so maybe in her mind, if it was blue vinyl, it had to be a tarp because that was her experience hook that she was hanging that on. I don't know, but I think she did mistake the raincoat for a tarp, and I think he came in. He had the guns wrapped in it, and nobody knows where the guns went. But I think that's what happened. So I want to thank all of you once again for joining us. Thanks for your donations tonight. Thanks for always being such great members of our chat. Please continue to like and subscribe and share with your friends. And join us next week, late next week, for another installment of our quilt. And join us on Friday, I hope, because I hope there'll be some exciting things coming out of there, out of the hearing tomorrow. So join us on Friday for all things Vallow Daybell. Have a great week. And if I don't talk to you, have a great weekend. Good night.